In the 1780s, France was a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. The treasury was empty, the people were starving, and the gap between the suffering masses and the glittering royal court at Versailles had become an unbridgeable chasm. At the center of this glittering world, a symbol of all its excess and detachment, was Queen Marie Antoinette. The public despised her. They called her Madame Deficit, blaming her lavish parties, extravagant gowns, and rumored gambling habits for the nation's financial ruin. While the people of Paris starved for bread, the Queen, it was said, lived in a fantasy world of luxury. This reputation, whether fully deserved or not, had created a toxic atmosphere where the public was willing to believe absolutely anything negative about their queen. This story is not about the revolution. It is about the scandal that lit the fuse, a scandal so bizarre, so audacious, and so perfectly timed that it would destroy the last remaining shreds of the monarchy's reputation. It is known as the Affair of the Diamond Necklace, and like any great con, it begins with three things: an object of impossible desire, a desperate and powerful man, and a brilliant, ruthless schemer. First, the object. It was, perhaps, the most magnificent and cursed piece of jewelry in history. Commissioned years earlier by King Louis XV for his mistress, Madame du Barry, it was a cascading river of diamonds. It contained 647 flawless stones, some as large as walnuts, weighing a total of 2,840 carats. Its price was staggering, 1.6 million livres. In today's money, that would be well over $100 million. But before the necklace could be finished, the old king died of smallpox. His mistress was banished from court, and the jewelers, Baumer and Bassange, were stuck with an impossibly expensive item that no one in Europe could afford. They tried, desperately, to sell it to the new queen, Marie Antoinette, but even she was shocked by the price. Knowing the kingdom's financial state, she famously rejected it, allegedly stating, "We have more need of battleships than of necklaces." The jewelers were left on the brink of bankruptcy, holding their diamond mountain. Now we introduce our schemer. Her name was Jeanne de la Motte. Jeanne was a woman of noble blood, a descendant of an illegitimate son of a French king, but her family had fallen on hard times. She grew up in poverty, obsessed with reclaiming the status and wealth she felt was her birthright. She was charismatic, intelligent, and utterly without morals. She clawed her way into the fringes of the royal court, surviving on charm and minor deceptions, always looking for the one big score that would secure her future. Finally, we have our Mark. He was not a foolish or simple man. On the contrary, he was one of the most powerful figures in all of France, Cardinal Prince Louis de Rohan. He was a bishop, a diplomat, and a member of one of the country's oldest and wealthiest families. But he had one fatal weakness. He was desperate for royal favor. Years earlier, while serving as ambassador, he had offended Marie Antoinette's powerful mother, the Empress of Austria. As a result, the Queen herself despised him. She publicly snubbed him at court, refusing to speak to him or even acknowledge his presence. For a man of Rohan's immense pride and ambition, this was a living torment. He would do anything to win back the Queen's approval. And it was in this weakness that our schemer, Jeanne de la Motte, saw her opening. By 1784, Jeanne had managed to become the cardinal's trusted confidant. She listened to his woes, his desperate obsession with the Queen, and slowly she began to plant a lie. She hinted that she had connections, that she was in fact a secret friend of Marie Antoinette. The Queen, Jeanne claimed, had confided in her. The cardinal, desperate for any sign of hope, believed her. Jeanne de Motte now had her mark. She knew about the desperate jewelers and their unsellable necklace, and she knew of the cardinal's bottomless wealth and his all-consuming desire to please the queen. All the pieces were in place for a con that would not only steal a fortune, but would bring a kingdom to its knees. Cardinal de Rohan was now a fish on a hook, and Jeanne de Motte began to reel him in. The con started with letters. Jeanne told the cardinal that the queen had forgiven him and wanted to communicate, but it had to be in absolute secrecy. Soon, a steady stream of forged letters, written on elegant blue gilt-edged paper, began to pass from Jeanne to the cardinal. These letters were masterpieces of manipulation. They were supposedly from Marie Antoinette, and they spoke of her secret political worries, her frustrations, and her growing friendship with the cardinal. For Rohan, reading these letters was intoxicating. He was finally in the queen's inner circle. He wrote passionate replies, vowing his undying loyalty, his complete devotion. Jeanne, of course, intercepted every single one. To cement the illusion, the queen, bear quoted, began to ask for small favors. She wrote that she wanted to give money to a poor family, but couldn't be seen doing it publicly. Would the cardinal be so kind to lend her the money? Rohan, overjoyed at the chance to prove his loyalty, handed over 50,000 livres to Jeanne to be passed on to the queen. Then came another request, and another. Jeanne was bleeding him dry, living a life of luxury on the cardinal's borrowed funds, all in the queen's name. But Rohan wanted more. The letters were not enough. He was desperate to see her, to hear her say the words, "I forgive you," with her own lips. Jeanne, sensing her con was at risk if she didn't deliver, prepared her most audacious move. She told the cardinal that the queen had agreed to a secret nighttime meeting. It was incredibly risky, she said, and could only last a moment. In August 1784, in the dark, sprawling gardens of the Palace of Versailles, Cardinal Rohan waited, his heart pounding. At midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown identical to one the queen famously wore. She was holding a rose. The cardinal rushed forward and fell to his knees, his eyes blinded by adoration and the darkness. The woman, whose face he could barely see, whispered, "You may hope that the past will be forgotten." She handed him the rose. Before Rohan could say more, a voice, Jeanne's accomplice, hissed, "Someone is coming!" The mysterious woman vanished back into the trees. The cardinal was ecstatic. He was in a state of pure euphoria. He had met the queen. She had forgiven him. He was her secret agent. The woman, of course, was not Marie Antoinette. She was a local prostitute named Nicole Leguay, whom Jeanne had hired because she bore a vague resemblance to the queen. Now that Rohan was completely under her spell, Jeanne de Motte prepared to set the final hook. She presented him with the queen's greatest and secret problem. Marie Antoinette, she claimed, desperately wanted that magnificent diamond necklace, the one the jewelers Baumer and Bassange had been trying to sell for years. But the king had refused to buy it for her, and she did not dare buy it publicly after all the criticism of her spending. The queen, through a new forged letter, asked Rohan for the ultimate favor. Would he, as his secret friend, use his own name and credit to buy the necklace on her behalf? She would pay him back in installments, in secret. This was the moment Cardinal de Rohan had been waiting for. This was his chance to perform a service so great, so discreet,
that the queen would be indebted to him forever. He would be the hero who secretly gave the queen her heart's desire.
On January 29, 1785, Cardinal de Rohan, one of the most powerful men in France, walked into the jewelry shop of Baumer and Bassange. He presented them with forged documents authorizing the purchase on the Queen's behalf and signed a contract in his own name. He agreed to pay the staggering 1.6 million livres in a series of installments. The jewelers, overjoyed to finally be free of their white elephant, handed over the colossal diamond necklace. Cardinal de Rohan took the glittering treasure and delivered it not to the Queen, but to Jeanne de la Motte, who was to act as the secret intermediary. Jeanne and her husband immediately took the necklace to London. There they began the work of vandals. They broke the magnificent piece apart, prying the 647 flawless diamonds from their settings, and began selling them off, one by one. The con was complete. For a few months, Jeanne de la Motte and her accomplices lived like royalty. They were in London, selling the priceless diamonds from the necklace piece by piece, amassing a fortune. Back in Paris, Cardinal de Rohan waited in blissful ignorance, proud of the secret service he had performed for his queen. But the con had a deadline. The day the first installment payment was due to the jewelers, Baumer and Bassange. The date arrived and no payment came. The jewelers, already on the brink of financial ruin, sent a polite, then a nervous, and finally a frantic note to Cardinal de Rohan. Rohan, confused, contacted Jeanne de la Motte. Jeanne, a master of stalling, had excuses ready. The Queen's private funds were delayed. The transaction was too sensitive. Be patient. But the jewelers' patience had run out. They had bet their entire company on this one sale. Fearing the cardinal was stalling them, they decided to take a terrifying risk. They would bypass Rohan and go directly to the Queen herself. In July 1785, the jewelers managed to get an audience with Marie Antoinette. They presented her with a note. It was not for payment. It was a note of gratitude, thanking her for finally purchasing their magnificent necklace. Marie Antoinette was completely baffled. She summoned the head jeweler, Baumer, to explain himself. "What necklace are you talking about?" she demanded. She reminded him that she had refused to buy it years ago, and her decision was final. Baumer's blood ran cold. He stammered, "But, Your Majesty, the necklace, the one you acquired through the good services of Cardinal de Rohan." The Queen was now more than confused, she was alarmed. "Cardinal de Rohan," she said with contempt, "I have not spoken to that man in 8 years." Now, in a full-blown panic, Baumer produced the contract. He showed the Queen the forged documents, the ones authorizing the purchase on her behalf, and the payment plan signed by the cardinal. Marie Antoinette looked at the sloppy, forged signature at the bottom of the document. Marie Antoinette de France. She was horrified and enraged. Not only was it a forgery, it was a clumsy one. French royalty did not sign with their title. She signed only Marie Antoinette. She immediately took the forged documents to her husband, King Louis XVI. The king, a quiet and reserved man, flew into a rare and terrifying rage. This was not just fraud, this was high treason. A cardinal of the church and a member of the elite Rohan family had used the Queen's name, the name of France, in a scandalous multi-million livre criminal conspiracy. The king and queen summoned Cardinal de Rohan to their private chambers. Rohan, still blissfully unaware, walked in, likely believing this was the moment he would finally be publicly thanked and brought back into favor. Instead, he was met by the king, who was holding the forged contract. "Did you," the king demanded, "purchase this diamond necklace in the Queen's name?" Rohan's world dissolved. He looked at the Queen, expecting a nod, a sign of their secret alliance. He was met with a stare of pure, cold fury. He stammered, "I did, but I was authorized by Her Majesty." "Authorized? By me?
We have not spoken in years. How could you, a prince of the church, be so gullible as to believe I would conduct such an affair through secret letters?" Rohan, cornered and humiliated, finally played his last card. He produced the stack of treasured forged letters. The king and queen examined them. The con was instantly laid bare. The king had a choice. He could handle this quietly, exiling the cardinal and burying the scandal to protect the monarchy's reputation. Or he could make a public example. He chose the latter. August 15th, 1785. It was the Feast of the Assumption, one of the most sacred and public days at the Palace of Versailles. The entire court was assembled in their finest attire. Cardinal de Rohan was in his magnificent ceremonial robes, preparing to celebrate High Mass in the royal chapel. Moments before the service was to begin, the king's guards marched into the Hall of Mirrors. In front of the entire horrified court, they arrested the cardinal and marched him out of the palace like a common criminal. The news hit Paris like an explosion. A prince of the church, a Rohan, arrested in Versailles. The queen's name linked to a colossal fraud. The scandal was no longer a secret. Jeanne de la Motte was quickly captured. So was the prostitute, Nicole Leguay. All the players were in custody. The stage was now set for the most sensational trial of the 18th century, a trial that would put the entire French monarchy in the dock. The trial that began in 1786 was not just the trial of a few con artists. It was the trial of the entire regime. The Parlement de Paris, the highest court in the land, presided. The public, already seething with resentment towards the monarchy, devoured every detail. Pamphlets and cartoons flooded the streets, depicting the queen as a scheming, decadent, and sexually deviant manipulator. The trial was a circus. The key players, sensing the public's mood, crafted their defenses perfectly. Cardinal de Rohan, the foolish and arrogant prince, portrayed himself as the ultimate victim. He claimed he was blinded by his innocent love and devotion for the queen, a devotion that the wicked Jeanne de la Motte had cruelly exploited. To the anti-monarchist public, Rohan became a sympathetic figure, a good man duped by a manipulative court. Jeanne de la Motte, the mastermind, delivered the performance of a lifetime. She was defiant, brilliant, and utterly shameless. She admitted to parts of the con, but claimed she was just a minor player. The real conspiracy, she hinted, was between the cardinal and the queen herself. She painted Marie Antoinette as a vindictive woman who had orchestrated the whole affair to ruin Rohan, her political enemy. The public, eager to believe the worst, embraced this lie. And Marie Antoinette, she, the true victim, could do nothing. Royal protocol meant she could not defend herself. She could not appear in court. She could only remain silent in the palace while her name was dragged through the mud, while every lie told about her was printed as fact. In May 1786, after a sensational trial, the court delivered its verdict, and it was a political earthquake. Cardinal de Rohan was found not guilty. The court ruled that he had been completely fooled. He was acquitted of all charges. When the verdict was read, the Paris mob erupted in celebration. They saw it as a victory, not for Rohan, but against the queen. Rohan was hailed as a hero who had stood up to royal tyranny. The prostitute, Nicole Leguay, was also acquitted.
Jeanne de la Motte, the clear mastermind, was found guilty. She was sentenced to be publicly whipped, branded on both shoulders with the letter V for voleuse, thief, and imprisoned for life. But even her punishment backfired. She screamed and fought so violently during the branding that the executioner missed, branding her breast instead. This act of barbarism turned her into a martyr in the eyes of the public. She later escaped prison and fled to London, where she published her memoirs, filled with even more salacious and damaging lies about the Queen, which became international bestsellers. The trial was a complete and utter disaster for the monarchy. Marie Antoinette had been publicly declared innocent by the court, but in the court of public opinion, she had been found guilty. The verdict implied the impossible, that a cardinal of France could genuinely believe that his queen would conduct a secret, adulterous coded correspondence to buy a necklace through fraud. If the public believed that was plausible, it meant the queen's reputation was already so toxic, so damaged, that she was beyond saving. The affair of the diamond necklace was the point of no return. It stripped the monarchy of its majesty, its sacredness. It exposed the court as decadent, gullible, and corrupt. Less than 3 years later, the Bastille would be stormed, and the French Revolution would begin. When Marie Antoinette was finally put on trial by the revolutionaries years later,